So it's really lovely to be here with you this afternoon, Margaret. This is Dr. Margaret Hanna, who's from International Futures Forum. And we are talking today about a resource called Kit Bag. I've got it here with me. I've unravelled it actually. So that we wanted to tell you something about the journey we've been on together with Kit Bag since I first came across it about 3 years ago now. So Margaret, let's just plunge straight in and just tell me, what's the background to Kit Bag? How did it come about and what's its intention?
Thanks, Gillian. It's great to be on the call with you. Yeah, so Kit Bag got started in the early noughties. My background's in public health, and I was particularly concerned about the mental health challenges of the 21st century, that there were never going to be enough psychologists, therapists and others to deal with the distress that people were experiencing, often owing to rapid change, stresses in work environments, stresses in communities, and we felt that what we could do was to, if you like, bottle what the therapist or psychologist does in their practice and put it into a resource that enables people to do this for themselves. So we kind of set about this as a design challenge, and we were really supported by a number of innovation grants to get going with the work. And over the years, we kind of refined and improved so that by about 2010, we were able to get started.
And so who were the kind of people that you were working with? What were the kind of ingredients that fed into what Kit Bag looks like?
Well, we had psychoanalysts, we had psychotherapists, psychologists. They worked both in adult and in children's services. They were an international group. We also had designers, graphic designers, textile designers, and as I say, a lot of iteration of that's the way that designers do their work. They're happy to start with something very scrappy, and then you just gradually work with people in different settings. So at that point, we were looking for people who were in stressed circumstances. For example, women in prison, or carers groups, or domestic abuse agencies. But as this work progressed, we found it a lot easier to connect with children and families and young people with the resource. It being so innovative and different, it was something that they found much more easy to engage with. And from there, that's when the work really took off.
I think since I've known Kit Bag, and it's a bit difficult on this call to unravel it, we can't do it, but we encourage people to go to the website, the IAFF website, and have a look at it. But I would agree with people when I share it with social workers, who obviously I'm doing most of my work with. They often initially look at it and think, oh, it doesn't look very much, there's not much there. But I think what you're saying is that all these ingredients have been carefully thought about and are purposeful.
Absolutely. Everything in it is there for a reason.
Yeah.
And there are a few kind of basic principles. The first is that it's multisensory. So we kind of think of emotions as all in the mind, but of course we actually experiencing them through our bodies. And part of how we have to engage with our feeling world is to become centered and grounded in reality, here, present in the moment. And so a lot of the resource is designed to kind of get you that immediate touch, softness, feel for just being here and not elsewhere. So that's the first piece of it. And that's what a good therapist will always do when you arrive in the room. You kind of sit down, feel the weight of yourself on the chair, whatever the kind of little routine is.
Yeah.
And that's part of what is there in all of those ingredients. The second part of it, and it's really important, is this kind of unraveling and then at the end of a session to refurl. And this slows people down, and it again is soft, it's an opening, but it also creates this different space, this what we would call a liminal space. The therapists call this a liminal space, where you are able to enter into a deeper conversation about feelings, the world of affect, and then you can then roll it up at the end of that session You don't necessarily have to have used all of the ingredients there, but whatever it was, you roll it back up until the next time. And that's terribly important. The closure is just as important as the opening.
Yes, that's what I find when I'm introducing it to social workers, that I talk a lot about the ritual and how children really like rituals. So that sense that it's there to be unwrapped, and then you say, I think really important symbolically to be wrapped up again, is just lovely. So at every level, there's something thoughtful in it. And the more we understand that, the more we can practice thoughtfully with children. And I suppose everything that they do with it can be more carefully thought about, because they don't do things necessarily in the way that we expect them to, do we? I think this is something that I've discovered since we've introduced it to social workers. I've had a lot of social workers say to me, oh, I see now, I kind of follow the child. The child will lead the way. And if I trust that, I will get information. I will understand the child better, rather than me saying, well, let's use these and we'll do it this way. So there's that child-led kind of principle as well that I think is really helpful for the social work profession, because we're so driven by all the questions we've got to answer on the form that is back in the office, you know. And we're probably missing a whole lot of information because we are not being child-centered. We're being kind of system-centered.
Yeah. Well, I was particularly struck by that comment in the What Works for Children's Social Care report, that it shifts the power dynamic, which is what you're describing there.
Yes.
And it enables that child to express themselves from their perspective. And I think it also shifts away from doing to being for the social worker. And then they're not extracting information, they're noticing. And I think by noticing how the child is interacting with this, you actually, the child is communicating. They may not be putting it into words, but the way in which they engage with you using Kitbag gives you a lot of information.
That is, yes, I love that. They're not extracting information, they're noticing things. I will take that as a really useful little kind of mantra, really. Notice, don't extract.
Yeah.
Because I think that is, and it's not a criticism of individual social workers, but it is a criticism, I think, of the way the system has developed, that it requires people to have, you know, what's required in the system at the fore of their minds, rather than the child in front of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do really feel this other part, though, that the child is communicating in non-verbal ways.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and often a child, particularly in the stress circumstances that social workers will find them in, are not able to put things into words.
Yes.
And so that's also important for how Kitbag can be so helpful.
Yes. Yes. What's come to mind there, Margaret, was one of the workers who told us about the little boy who adapted one of the mindfulness cards, the presence cards, the one about breathing in and out slowly. And he turned it into, he'd breathe in like a gorilla and out like a sloth, like this. He had found his own way of, and he was using it in his school environment because he found that he was getting into trouble, and he'd learnt this. So also, I think you talk, don't you, about this kind of over time, children in a sense won't need Kitbag because they will have internalized the kind of way of being that it invites.
Yeah, absolutely. It in actual fact, what it's doing is awakening innate capacities, innate ways of being, and so inevitably, once you've got those faculties opened and available to you, you don't need the resource. But also what I heard from that point you made there, Gillian, is a little and often the repetition is like practicing a new musical instrument. You know, you need to play it a few times to get good at it, and then you don't need the tutor. You don't need the music even. You can play it by your, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think there's something here about little and often, and that in the end, the child and the family and the social work service, because what we haven't talked about here is the impact it has on the team and
Yes.
the culture of the organization when it can work in this much more humanistic way. Because fundamentally, Kitbag is based around good quality, person-centered approaches.
Mm. So also, just before we move into that other space about its impact on social work more widely, I think that's an important thing you said there about practicing an instrument, doing little and often, and also not being fearful you can get it wrong, because I think
Hmm.
there's a strong sense that there's a right way of doing things. And I think what we're saying here is there is no right or wrong, it just is. And what happens, happens.
Hmm.
And then you're less constrained by wondering if you've got it right. So I think that's another freeing thing about it as well.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Yeah. So what have you noticed since we've been working together, and we've introduced it to probably about 10, I think, local authorities now in different ways, haven't we? What have you noticed about how it's sort of landed in social work spaces? Because up until now, it's primarily been in schools, hasn't it? That's been its main place of take up.
Yeah, yes, and also in family agencies, and
Oh,
now
yeah.
with young carers, with homeless agencies. It's interesting. Once it gets a foothold in an area, it can start to spread because people aren't just accessing one service, or that children aren't just going to school. That there are
Mm,
other elements, other ways in which they can then also experience Kitbag if you're kind of growing it organically in a local area. Um, but the thing about social work practice, I think the first thing to say is that it's a highly skilled workforce.
mm,
You know,
mm,
there's no
mm,
question here about
mm,
their capability, but they're not given the expansion of space and time to have that engagement with children and families in the way that they yearn for,
mm,
and
mm,
they want to have that engagement. And I think what Kitbag does is give them a really slick and quite efficient way of using their time to do that really important work. And that's what brought us together in the first place, Gillian. It was
mm,
all of your
mm.
work on talking with children and listening to children, and here was a way of doing so which wasn't going to eat into hours of your day. On the contrary, but at the same time, paradoxically, can kind of, it's a bit like Roger Federer. He looks as if he's got more time on the ball, when he's
Yes,
playing tennis.
yes.
And it's like this for the social workers. They've got
Yeah,
more time with the child because they're working in this, they're working on the being and not just the doing. I think that's
yeah,
terribly important.
yeah. That's being more attuned, isn't it, to the child's world? Yes. So I think we've introduced it, haven't we, to social workers and social work assistants and people across the local authority children's services sector. But I think what also surprised us, didn't it, was when it was introduced to foster carers, which wasn't where we had initially thought about it. But I think that
Absolutely.
having a
Yeah.
kit bag in the home has proved very interesting, hasn't it?
It really has. It really
Yeah.
has. I think that's been a really wonderful discovery that
Mm,
actually this, and it tells you something about the foster carers wanting to be able to engage with the young people that they're working with, caring for, in ways that help them as well to
mm,
understand that young person, um, but doing so in a way that doesn't require all of that skill and qualifications that the social workers have
mm,
all got. It's very much in the family, at home, a little bit before they go to school, or a little bit before they go to bed, and each family seems to have created their own routine with it.
mm,
And we're finding that more and more also with our schools work, that the schools are now working with families, and many of these schools are in very poor areas of Scotland, and they find that the parents are suddenly realizing, oh my goodness, I just need that little bit of one-to-one time with my child.
mm.
And even if I only do it once a week because I've got 6 children,
Yeah,
I can do that now because I've
yeah.
got this little resource. And the child has already learnt about it at school, so he's able
Yes, so it joins the two
yeah,
worlds,
it joins
doesn't
the
it?
two worlds. And
Yeah,
I think that's what foster carers can do. They can join the world of the child from foster care to social work, and ideally into the schools as well.
yeah. And I think that's interesting because, of course, when it's in the home, I think it's also more ordinary and normal, isn't it? It doesn't have this kind of maybe negative association. If it's just there and anybody can pick it up at any time and do it on their own or do it with somebody else, it's just part of the fabric of, ordinary everyday life, isn't it? So I
It,
love that sort of, which is, anybody can have it. You don't only have it because, you're a social worker or a family that social workers work with. I think it's that application to all of us. I think that when I discovered that Brené Brown worked out that the average number of emotions the average person can name is 3, then you realize we all need something that helps us become more emotionally literate, because it's not our first language, and it needs to become more so. And I think then, just to move on to that other space where we've taken it, is into the, inviting teams, isn't it, to use it. So again, it's not just a resource for children, it's a resource for all of us. And I've heard lovely stories of teams using different elements of Kitbag in their team meetings, or the little puppets that they get sort of passed around as a way of having conversations. So it seems like, there is growing awareness that it's good for all of us.
yeah, I think, I mean, we've got 1 or 2 projects going on in other countries, and one of the most interesting ones relevant to what you've just said is in Uganda, where a domestic abuse agency is using Kitbag with the children, with the women, and also themselves.
Mm.
And they do so daily. And they say, we
Okay.
start the day with a presence card and a feelings card, and we take an animal card so that we as a team are set up for the day.
Yeah.
And they honestly are saying they wouldn't be able to get through that work if they weren't doing that
Yeah.
each
Yeah.
day. So
Yeah.
I think there's something essential here going on around the sustaining of the energy to do this emotional work
Yes.
that has to be fed by something
Yes.
meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one of the major parts of Kitbag's role in helping social workers and the services themselves to respond to these desperately difficult
Mm.
circumstances that people are
Mm.
finding themselves in.
And I think that's a reminder to me that, we can only be as helpful and effective with the families as we are sort of helped and nourished and supported. Otherwise we become, drained. And there's such a challenge out there in the social work sector about retention and recruitment, because people feel overwhelmed and burnt out. And it seems to me that, Kitbag won't address all of that, but it goes some way to reminding us of our emotional resources and how important they are for this work, and therefore how important it is to replenish them and be attentive to them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, just a final question, really. What's your sort of, I mean, we've not said this to each other, perhaps we have to ask it of each other. What's our vision? What do we think, we can do in terms of continuing to take this into the social work sector?
Yeah, well, I think it's good to see it already taking root,
Mm,
and I think continuing to learn from the people who are doing it in practice, week by week, day by day, will be very valuable to help
mm,
us grow this. But in the end, what's happening in social work is happening also in health services, in prison services, in youth services. That we have to get out of that system which is requiring all of that data,
mm,
box filling, etc.,
mm, mm,
and restore the primacy of quality relationships in human systems, in human services.
mm,
Um, and if we do that, we will be we will get to the results that we're looking for.
mm,
Uh,
mm.
because the results aren't being generated terribly successfully by the current systems.
Yes.
We still need some quality assurance, we still need some good
Yes.
governance and so forth, but it's in service of this human work.
Yes.
And you know, IFF works across all those domains. It's not just within the social work field by any means, or indeed education. And we see this happening, again and again, that once people can once they realize they're not just an individual, they're a person. This is what the person-centered world will describe, that a person has relationships, a person has history, culture, has a way of seeing the world and engaging with the world, which is both unique to them and also something that they want to share and grow with others. And that kind of personhood is what humanity is wanting to express, not
Yes.
not a cookie cutter kind of one size fits all person, individual who eats off the same size plate and reads the same books, etc. We're not. I've heard it called battery human. We're not a battery human. We don't want a barcode on us.
Like a battery chicken.
Yeah.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, we don't want that. But, unfortunately, that's the direction that a lot of our society is shifting towards. But
Yes.
actually, this is a hello, there's a wake up, actually there's a richer, deeper, more profound opportunity for humans in this society if we are willing to take it. Now, that sounds like a million miles away from Kitbag, but in fact, that's what Kitbag's there to help grow.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I couldn't put it anything like that. But I guess my vision is something around, well, I think in this conversation, partly thinking about having modest ambitions, in the sense that, great things grow from small things, the acorn on the oak tree kind of thing, not being put off by just small developments, and that culture spreads in a much more organic way than being kind of slapped onto something. And I think that's what I notice when I talk to social workers who have really, adopted Kitbag, really enjoy it and like working with it, that their infection, their enthusiasm infects other people.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
So
And
it's
I
sort of
think
slow growth.
I think their infection and also their stories of the changes that they're seeing in the children and the families that they're working with. And I mean, even something as simple as the manager who says, the reports I'm getting back now are so much better
That's right. Yes.
than they were.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
there's a richness in what is going on, which the boxes don't allow us to talk about. But now with the kit bag, it's as if they're being given permission to say a little bit more about this child and that child's situation. And the manager can then start to make some more relevant and timely decisions about what needs to happen next.
Yeah. Yeah. So everybody becomes more humane with everybody else, and the way we engage with the systems becomes more humane and sort of emotionally informed, doesn't it? Well,
Sounds like a good note to finish on.
it does. It does. So we would just encourage people to look at the IFF website if you're interested to find out more about Kitbag. There's a report on the What Works Centre for Children's Social Care about the impact of Kitbag in various authorities, and just to get in touch with me at the University of Sussex if you'd like to know more. Thank you so much, Margaret. Again, I've learnt something new, as I always do when I talk to you, so greatly appreciated.
Thank you,
Bye-bye now.
Gillian. Thank you.